So the Rembrandt brown, then, as I was saying, is the primary metaphysical color. It's invented by the North. It comes out of the Venetian school, migrates into the North, and it becomes the great metaphysical color par excellence. That's finished off by the German Romantic painters Liebel and Carl Friedrich Lessing and Spitzweg and Caspar David Friedrich and Arnold Bürklein. All these great Romantic German painters that he says basically represent an opposition to the plein air painters of the Impressionists, who he says are basically shallow. And the opposition in the 19th century between the two schools, the German Romantic school and the French school, is the same thing as the opposition between culture and civilization. The final resistance, he says, that's put up in the painting that is signified by German Romantic painting is the final resistance, and it's a resistance doomed to fail, which is interesting because that's a sort of prophecy of the outcome of the world wars for the Germans. Doomed to fail, the resistance of soul against intellect, the resistance of culture versus civilization, the resistance of the grand metaphysical cosmic world to the merely flat, prosaic, banal world of the megalopolis, where reason is the primary thing. This is the other thing I think that we can think of when we think about the conflicts. All of this, and you can see this coming in Spengler. He's got it nailed, this conflict of values. All of this that gets realized in the world wars is basically the collision between two different utopias. The utopian vision of the Germans as a world without change, a world frozen and arrested in time, and the utopian vision of the Allies with their world of a world governed by science and reason. The regression of, especially in the case of the Nazis, to mythical and magical modes of thinking. Basically what's going on with the Germans there is that they exemplify Gebser's magical and mythical consciousness structures. They're regressing to these, or at least trying to conserve and hold on to them, while the Allies, the Americans, Britain, and France, are moving on into the late deficient mode of the rational consciousness structure, which they're trying to build an entire civilization based on. And it's a civilization of surfaces without depths, whereas the German civilization is hanging on to these metaphysical cosmic depths. And you can also see this, I think, in the creation of the two different, what later become the two different popular literary genres of fantasy fiction versus science fiction. It was the Germans who invented fantasy, the genre of fantasy, what's called fantasy nowadays, which is really swords and sorcery, starting with Wagner. Wagner creates the basic mythology for the Nazis, and it is also the beginnings of the creation of the genre of fantasy, what Tolkien will later popularize as swords and sorcery epic. That starts with the Germans. And it's basically a world that petrifies and fossilizes the magical and mythical consciousness structures. It's entirely backward looking. It's oriented to the past, especially the early medieval period of Faustian civilization before Christian influences came in as a pseudomorphosis and drowned and swallowed them, versus with the world of the Allies. At the same time, we get the creation of science fiction with Poe and Verne. Verne is to the utopia of the Allies what Wagner is to the utopia of the Nazis. Science fiction is the world of machines and gadgets. Verne saw them coming. Most of what did actually unfold, submarines and airplanes and blimps and floating islands like the Titanic, is already clearly forecast and seen in the novels of Jules Verne, as everybody knows. He's laying out the whole science fiction utopia, and it's a world based on change, a world based on novelty, the cult of the wonder child, in which change and the new are embraced, and an endless proliferation of machines and gadgets. And basically, I think that you can see with the German mentality is that there's a premonition amongst the Germans of what that world is tantamount to, a technopolis, which we're living in today. They basically saw here, I think, in a half-intuitive way, certainly in Spengler, who I don't think understood the damaging effects of technology quite as well as some of the other German philosophers, is that in a culture in which you have based the society on a constant proliferation of gadgets and an embracing of gadgets, you are also simultaneously basically giving up all your values, because technology liquidates values. This is a connection that's rarely made and rarely seen. But I think the Germans saw this clearly, and it's part of the whole raison d'etre of their resistance in what they're creating here. Every new gadget that comes along, and Neil Postman was clear about this, liquidates cultural values. Heidegger also is very clear about this, much clearer than Spengler is, that technology is a threat to all values, whether it's the Allies or the Axis powers, whether it's right or left, because gadgets liquidate earlier modes of life. Every new gadget that comes along makes new things possible, but it also liquidates older forms of life. The gramophone, the coming in with the gramophone, brought the concert into everybody's home, so you didn't have to go out to the concert hall to listen to the concert, but now, since you've got the domestication of the concert, why learn a musical instrument? So from that point on, the learning of a musical instrument begins to fall out of the basic pedagogy of one's education. You no longer have to learn a musical instrument, since if you want to hear music, just put on a record. So there again, we have the liquidation of values. We have this nihilism of every new technology coming along, putting television in the pubs, as William Irma Thompson remarked, obsolesced singing in pubs. Nobody sings in pubs anymore. The television encourages, contrary I think to McLuhan, the television encourages a private mental space. McLuhan said that television was all-inclusive and involved the individual in depth in what was going on in society. But actually, I think, as the pub analogy illustrates, it does the opposite. Television closes off everything that is within the circuit of the perceiver's relationship to the screen. Everything else becomes peripheral, including human communication. So it locks the human being into a private modality, the television screen does. And so it's basically hostile to community values. When you get TVs into a place, and we see not just televisions, but computer screens, cable television screens, they're more and more ubiquitous. Every time I walk into a new restaurant, I was just in a restaurant the other day, television screens hanging everywhere that had not been there a few years ago. In gas stations now, you go to fill up your gas, there's a television screen trying to program your thoughts with capitalist propaganda, so you don't have I used to enjoy going to a gas station, filling up and standing there and just being reflective for a few minutes. Now I can't do that. My thoughts are hijacked by this ridiculous monitor that's blaring its propaganda into my consciousness while I'm trying to fill up my gas tank. So I think it's clear here that what the Germans foresaw correctly, what they were right about, they were certainly wrong about all the racist nonsense. We can not even enter into any of that. That's all. Everybody agrees that's nonsense. But what they got right was the fact that a society that embraces technology in a pell-mell, heedless of consequences sense is a society that's getting ready to surrender its values, that is leaving its values behind, and is getting ready to embrace change for the sake of change, and nihilism that will soon liquidate everyone's values and will inflict upon the society exactly what has happened, exactly what Spengler predicted would happen, a meaningless megalopolitan consumer shopping world in which nothing matters except how much money you make. That's it. Everything else is secondary to that. And we have technology and the cult of technology to thank for this. And there's a direct, concrete relationship between the two. And I think that Spengler foresaw this. So those on the left, and I've heard this in a number of cases, who dismiss Spengler as a mere Nazi apologist. I mean, his view, after all, the Nazis liked him. He grudgingly, he voted for them when the National Socialists were coming to power in 1933, and Hitler was made Reichschancellor. In 1933, Spengler was initially grudgingly accepting of them. He and his sister lived with him, hung a swastika flag out of their balcony, and they gave them their initial support. Although that quickly changed once Hitler put through the purges in the next year in 1934, when he purged the SA of all of its elements, laid down a list of proscriptions for a grand Roman style, just like Sulla did. Sulla's proclamations, as soon as he got into power, liquidated everyone who represented a threat. When that happened and Hitler put through the purges of the SA, liquidating Ernst Röhm, the captain of the SA, and anyone who was regarded by him as a potential threat, Spengler, I think, became disillusioned with them very quickly, as Heidegger did after signing up and then becoming disillusioned with them in a matter of months. I think they knew really what they had voted for was a big mistake, because along with the conservatism of values that people like Spengler and Heidegger saw as a good thing that the Nazis would bring to them, I don't think it dawned on them what the Faustian price of that was going to be. the dehumanization of the individual, the giving up of all civil rights, and especially the ethnic cleansing, most of whom, the average German, didn't realize that the Nazis were going to put through an actual extermination final solution campaign. None of them, I think, quite realized until toward the end of the war that that is what the main thing that the Nazis were going to put into play. The main thing I think that we can take away from all this, that I think that the Germans got right, that they knew was going to happen, was the nihilism that has now come to prevail, the sense of ennui that we are now suffering from in this decline of the West, which Spengler was the first to perceive, and I think exactly what he said was going to happen has now happened. We are living in the world that he envisioned, a world of nihilism, drug addiction, crime. The right has this right. I'll go along with them up to this point, that the conservatives have it right, that a valueless, nihilistic society leads to a society of drug addiction, crime, gangs, terrorism. Just it's a gigantic disaster when a society simply surrenders itself to change for the sake of change, and we have it inflicted on us, then we're all losers. So I think the right have that much correct. I don't go along with them, and I think there's a basic irony that the right misses, that today's right misses, in that it embraces family values, and it says that the good old values, I mean, they are correct in saying that values are important. They're the defense mechanism against all this corruption, but in their support of big business and industry, what they miss, and this was pointed out by Ted Kaczynski in his Unabomber manifesto, what they miss is that it's precisely the big business world of industrialization that is liquidating those very family values. Industrialization and family values are absolutely anathema to each other, because the industry, the corporation, demands from the individual his loyalty. And loyalty to the family is a secondary thing, and so consequently you see the shearing away of the extended family, then now then you have the upholding of the nuclear family, and now even that is gone, and we just have the single parent family. We have industrialization and capitalism to thank for all this, and I think that the right misses this basic irony, that in supporting the world of big business and industrialization and the corporate world of global free trade, they are inadvertently supporting the very thing that's liquidating their own family values that they proclaim to represent, and so forth. So we're living in a big mess. It's a complicated world, but I think that what Spengler saw is exactly what has come to happen, and I think that liberals who dismiss him as a Nazi apologist are missing something essential in his vision. So we'll leave it there with this chapter on the arts of form and the introduction of Spengler's aesthetics, together with my explanation of why they are such reactionary, old-fashioned aesthetics. And then we'll move on into the next chapter.